Hari Om, everyone, and welcome to this special session with a wonderful guest, Acharya Siddhartha Krishna. Siddhartha ji grew up in a yogic family. His father, a great yogi, who trained Siddhartha ji from an early age. By the tender age of perhaps 8 or 9, Siddhartha ji already memorized the entire Bhagavad Gita by heart, followed by the Upanishads and Panini's Ashtadhyayi, the famous grammar work. He was then educated at the prestigious Sri Kailas Ashram in Rishikesh and also became one of the main proofreaders for the Guru at the ashram, and eventually became a teacher at Kailas Ashram, which is a great distinction. He has many accomplishments which we cannot list here, one of them being the Yoga Shiromani Award. He's a highly respected figure in the field of yoga and Vedanta. Many great scholars from across the world come to seek his views and advice. He is a yearly panelist at the International Yoga Festival and at the International Film Festival in Rishikesh. And I can tell you from my own experience, because he is my childhood friend, that without exaggeration, and I'm sure he will not like me saying this, there is no greater Sanskrit scholar, in my opinion, today. He is in the top 5, top 6 scholars in the world when it comes to Sanskrit, when it comes to Dharma. So now, without further ado, having said all this, we wish to bring Siddhartha ji on, and he will speak for 35 to 45 minutes, and then you are encouraged to ask as many questions as you like. The subject we have requested him to speak about is karma, the law of cause and effect. Now, Siddhartha ji, if I may request you, we also have Chandrakanchi here, who is the disciple of Bapu Shri, whom you know very well, Siddhartha ji. And now we will spotlight you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Vidyabhaskar ji. Such a blessing it is to be here. Thank you very much for the very kind introduction. Let's start with a few moments of silence, just to settle down. Sarve bhavantu sukhinah. Sarve santu niramayah. Sarve bhadrani pashyantu. Ma kaschid dukkha bhag bhavet. Om Shantihi, Shantihi, Shantihi. Vishnurva Tripurantako bhavatu va Brahma Surendrothava Bhanurva Shashalakshanoth Bhagavan Buddhoth Siddhothava Ragadvesha Visharti Moharahitaha Sattvanukam Yah sarvaihi sah samskrito gunaganais tasmai namah sarvada. Nakamayeham gatimishwarat param ashtardhiyuktam punarbhavam va Artim prapadye khiladeha bhajam antasthito yena bhavantya dukkhaha. Om Shantihi, Shantihi, Shantihi. My dear friends, the topic that I was given is, what does karma really mean? And then understanding it in our daily life. So let's start from the very beginning. What is karma? First of all, karma, simply in Sanskrit, it's just the Sanskrit word for action, activity. However, it is very important to keep in mind that here by action, we mean physical action as well as action that happens on the level of speech and even on the level of the mind. But today, I don't intend to speak about mere action. Today, I intend to speak about karma, which is shorthand for karma samskara. These days, when we speak of karma, in the spiritual world, what we mean is karma samskara. The samskaras caused by action. Now the question then arises, what is samskara? Samskara means impressions. It means conditioning. There are various types of samskaras. For example, and these are described in Sanskrit texts. One of them, Vega, for example, can be explained as mechanical force in physics. That's also a type of samskara which exists in the material world. Then Another type of samskara that the masters have described, sthitistapaka as it is known in Sanskrit, can be explained in English as the elastic force. For example, it occurs when an object, such as a spring, tries to return to its original shape. That original shape is its samskara. But today, I will focus on a type of samskara which exists within the hearts and minds of us human beings. A samskara which arises when we experience something and then remains there till it results in memory that comes up. That is called karma samskara. For today, this is the type of samskara that I will be talking about, an impression or a formation left behind by experiences, by the experiences of every activity that has happened on the level of the body, speech, and mind. There are sometimes mental activities, simple thinking, just thoughts. Even they leave behind impressions, but they leave behind impressions only in the mind itself. That part of the mind where such impressions get accumulated there is a technical word, a very specific word in Sanskrit for that, chitta, as used in the Sanskrit literature. Then activities on the level of speech leave behind impressions in the chitta, in the mind, as well as even in our speech. That is why we have accents. These accents, they are results of samskaras. For example, when a Swiss or a French person speaks English, he brings his Swiss or French samskaras into the English that he speaks. And not only the accent, not only the samskaras of the speech-producing organs, but even the grammatical structure of German, which is imprinted on his mind, may force him to speak English from that mental structure, and therefore sometimes may show in. I see it with myself. I have very strong samskaras because I grew up in India, so I have very strong samskaras of Hindi, and many times those samskaras easily show up the way I speak English. So you can call this samskara conditioning, which arose due to repeated practice of one specific language. In fact, yogic texts refer to language itself as a samskara which exists in the collective intellect. Loka buddhi, in the collective intellect. Language itself is a samskara, a conditioning. Similarly, when I perform activity on a physical level with my body, then every action leaves behind samskaras, impressions, not only in the mind, but also on my body, on our bodies. This is why when our body is totally conditioned, for example, by sitting always on chair, then we find it very difficult at some point that samskara becomes so strong that it becomes very difficult for us to sit on the ground. For example, in my case, I sit a lot, most of the times, always on the ground. But due to lack of awareness, for years and years, for decades and decades, I sat always with the same leg down and the same leg above. So even this samskara, this left samskara, this repeated practice, ongoing without becoming aware of it, created a kind of imbalance in my legs, of which I became aware only when I started practicing asanas seriously, and when I realized that in my uttanasana, in my standing forward bend pose, in fact, one leg is higher, slightly higher than the other. That is when my teacher said, oh my God, your legs have become slightly deformed. So then I became aware of it, and I started sitting consciously with alternating my legs, not always sitting with the same leg down. Initially, it felt so strange because the body was totally conditioned in that one particular posture all the time. But then gradually, the imbalance started to vanish. So this is just to give an example of physical samskara. So in yoga, we speak of different types of samskaras, yogic impressions, and also non-yogic impressions. When we practice yoga, but in the absence of practicing it, so let me try to give a physical example to make this point once again. Of course, what I'm explaining through physical examples is applicable to speech and also to the mind. But for example, as we get old, our body starts becoming stiff, our limbs start becoming stiff. This is also a kind of conditioning, a kind of samskara, a non-yogic samskara. This leads to then pain, discomfort in the body, neck problems, stiffness in the back, in the lower back, creates so many problems. On the other hand, flexibility of limbs, which we had as a child, all of us had it, but then as we grow, we lose it. But we can retain it and even gain it back through yogic practices. That is also a kind of samskara. That is also a kind of karma samskara, a karma impression, but that's a yogic impression. So these samskaras of stiffness, of flexibility can also be present on a psychological level. Stiffness or rigidity in thoughts may lead to strife with others. On the other hand, flexibility in our thinking promotes loving kindness in our relationship. So now let me summarize what I was trying to say, that samskara is a conditioning or habit or habitual pattern caused by our thoughts, by repeated thoughts, by repeated words, and by repeated deeds. They are formed by performing any action. And as we perform that action repeatedly, they get then deeply rooted as we perform that action again and again. So for example, when we start learning swimming, initially we don't know how to swim, but even in the first attempt, already a samskara, a subtle impression gets impressed. And then as we try again and again, one day we can even swim in open ocean. The same thing happens, for example, when we start learning to ride a bicycle. With repeated practice, we get better at it. We can even ride without holding the handle. And eventually, we can even ride it on a rope. So with practice, samskaras get strengthened. With repeating something again and again, they get strengthened. Even today, we don't think much about how we can stand up straight as a human being on both our legs. But how much effort we had to put into it, how much effort a child has to make to be able to stand up. It practices again and again. That is when this samskara of being able to stand on one's two legs becomes possible. So in fact, all our learning is a kind of conditioning of the mind. That's why even in psychology, we use words like classical conditioning or operant conditioning. And even in other words, such as observational learning or memory, all of them are all works of samskaras. All our memories are the results of our samskaras. Let's do a small activity to show you something about how samskaras work and how they form our individual nature. So let's close our eyes. And remember someone that you love the most, you love a lot. Maybe just our mother who held us as we were born. Just let's remember her. Let us bring her image very vividly in front of our inner eyes. Look at her, see her very clearly. What happened here? Before I urged you to think of her, to remember her, most likely you were not thinking of her. So where was her image present? Before you thought of her consciously, her image was present as a samskara in the chitta. And the moment I urged you to think of her, that samskara, that subtle impression was transformed into a conscious mental state. This is what is happening constantly in our mind. This is how thoughts transform constantly from samskaras. If you have seen a river, it flows from the unseen into the unseen. So similarly, these conscious thoughts, they are like that visible river which flows from the unseen into the unseen, and that unseen is the samskaras, from where this flow of thoughts is coming. So that shows that how all our thoughts, they are in fact just coming out of the samskaras that we have accumulated. And one thing else which I want you to notice, as I talked about your most beloved person or your mother, the actual image of the person that came to you was in each case different, unless of course you were siblings. But otherwise, the actual person's image was totally different. So many people of us are here, and yet each one had a very different image. One word, but different image in their minds. So this is to show that our samskaras are also the source of our individuality, and how as an individual we interpret different words and teachings in our own personal context, depending on the kinds of samskaras that we have accumulated. So in short, our individual nature, known in Sanskrit as Prakriti, for example, Shri Krishna speaks about a human being's Prakriti in the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. This Prakriti, this nature, this individual nature is the net result of all accumulated samskaras. Ultimately, these subtle impressions make us the kind of person we are. They form the contents of our thoughts. And this is amazing because even though we remain mostly unaware of them, they remain buried on unconscious layers. In fact, the conscious mind is just 1/10 of our mind, but 9/10 of it is present simply as samskaras, as impressions. And that is how they influence every decision we take in our lives, even though we mostly remain unaware of them, because they form our inclinations, propensities, interests that we form in our lives. Now comes the most important part of this discussion. How do our samskaras then influence the experiences of pleasure and pain, or suffering and happiness we have in life? Since they have so much influence over our thoughts, over our inclinations, they influence the decisions that we have to make whenever we are faced with crossroads of life. And we are faced with such crossroads every moment. Every moment we have to decide, should I do this? Should I do this? Should I continue to listen to Siddhartha, or should I maybe do something else? These decisions, we have to work with these decisions constantly. And these samskaras, they deeply influence the decisions that we take. This influences the kinds of circumstances we create for ourselves, because the decisions that we take influence the direction we take, and that influences the kind of circumstances we create for ourselves or find ourselves in. And this then ultimately influences the kinds of experiences, whether pleasant or unpleasant, which we have in our life. This is why the yogic masters say that every pleasant or unpleasant experience has its roots ultimately in our accumulated samskaras. It is in this sense that all our suffering and happiness is the result of our karmas, of our actions. It is a long process. However, the circle does not stop here. After something produces joy, we become attached to it. After something produces suffering, we start hating it. And this attachment and hatred again propagate a new circle of action, because they inspire new action, which then again starts the same circle anew. This is called samsara chakra, the self-propagating cycle of joy and suffering in this world, of which there is no end. Now, since raga and dvesha, attachment, desire and hatred, aversion, these two play a very key role in its continuation, and both of these are deeply rooted in avidya, ignorance. You may call it the forgetfulness of one's true nature. That forgetfulness of one's true nature is the ultimate propagating force of this wheel. This wheel cannot rotate without the push given by attachment and hatred, and without ultimately that forgetfulness of one's true nature, which then gives rise to asmita, to I amness, from which then attachment and hatred arise. So that is why ignorance is seen the root of all the fundamental causes of suffering, which causes all the different actions. Hatred and attachment also leads to fear, and these three things three things are really the fundamental force behind most of our ignorant activity. We either work out of attachment, or we work out of hatred, or we work out of fear. Just these three things are there. And that's why this is so true that some masters say that all karma samskara, all karmas are nothing but ultimately ignorance, forgetfulness of one's true nature. And that's why in texts like, in teachings like Vishnu Purana, which is a great teaching on yoga, a great yogic texts that the yogic masters repeatedly quote, there the word karma has been explained simply as avidya, as forgetfulness of one's true nature. There is no greater karma, the cause of all suffering, than forgetfulness. There is in fact a well-known expression in Mahayana Buddhist literature. I came across it when I was reading Acharya Asanga's Abhidharma Samuchaya, that all samskaras are conditioned by ignorance alone. Let me give a very simple example that, okay, I have many residues, many samskaras, but for them to express themselves in the dream world and create this whole world of experience in the dream, the first thing that is required is for me to forget myself. And only when I forget my true nature, then all those samskaras can create the whole dream world where I experience pleasure, pain, attachment, hatred, fear, tremendous fear, nightmares come. But at the root of all of that is nothing but just forgetting my true nature, which happens as my true nature in the sense as I am in waking state, in reality, versus dream. The same thing yogic masters say, that all these waking experiences, the positive, negative waking experiences, attachment, hatred, fear, all of this, for samskaras to be able to actually express themselves, that avidya is an essential component, that forgetfulness of one's true nature is an essential component. That is why Sage Patanjali refers to it as the root. And that is why now, hold on, karma is not destiny. It is the opposite of it. Everything in yogic traditions, masters reiterated again and again. Sage Vasishtha in Yoga Vasishtha says beautifully that everything can be achieved, but only through proper and systematic effort. He uses the word paurusha, human effort, which he defines as proper and systematic effort. The idea is that karma is not like destiny, something that is set on stone. If we want to change anything, then because the root cause of our present state of existence are our past deeds, the solution to our problems can also be found by modifying our present deeds and choices. That's why Sage Vasishtha gives this example of past karmas and present karmas constantly fighting like two rams, and whoever is stronger if we make more effort now than we have made in the past, then that good karma that we do now may overcome the past unwholesome karma, harmful karma. This is why then teachings like Ishavasya Upanishad, Dadhyanga Atharvana Rishi, who teaches this beautiful idea of loving kindness, of Maitri, Mitrasyama Chakshusha Sarvani Bhutani Samikshantam. May all beings look at me with the eye of a friend. May I look at them with the eyes of a friend of loving kindness. He says that the only way to not get tainted by unwholesome, by harmful karma samskaras is to engage ourselves in wholesome ones. Whenever we are faced with choices, we have always two possibilities. We can engage in dharma, which means uplifting actions, or we can do otherwise. We can engage in shubha, which means radiant activities, inspired by the radiance of knowledge and wisdom. We can engage in that. We can engage also in the opposite. We can engage in punya. Punya means purifying activities. Pu means to purify, purifying activities. Or we can engage in defiling activities. This is why it is so important to perform wholesome deeds guided by the principle of non-violence, speak wholesome words guided by truth, by truthfulness, which is pleasant and beneficial towards others, and think wholesome thoughts which are guided by loving kindness, compassion, joyfulness, and forgiveness. All other yogic activities, such as the pursuit of knowledge and wisdom, charity, tapas, austerity in the form of yogic asanas, and ultimately the greatest practice of yoga, dhyana, meditation, all of this, they become extremely meaningful in this context because they help us in cleaning the streams of the body, speech, and mind from unwholesome samskaras. But we have also, as I conclude, I would like to point out that all these are ultimately partial solutions. The only supreme solution is one: wisdom. Accumulating wisdom, accumulating awareness of one's true nature, because if the root cause of all the problems is forgetfulness of one's true nature, then it is totally logical that the only solution is the awareness of one's true nature. And that's why whether you call it jnana, wisdom, whether you call it vipassana, whatever you call it, only that can clean them up completely, because only wisdom, the light of wisdom, can truly eradicate the root cause of all unwholesome samskaras. That is why the goal on the path of wisdom is to transcend and go beyond the duality of even the good and bad karmas, to go beyond that. Yes, the good ones, the wholesome ones, are helpful in overcoming the unwholesome ones. That's why in one of the Upanishads, in Muktika Upanishad, cultivate the samskaras of loving kindness and compassion, etc., so that you may overcome all other harmful samskaras. But then even transcend them, yet the master says, continue to behave inspired by those samskaras of loving kindness, but deep down even transcend that and find total peace in yourself and be equal, just totally equal towards everything. So when the Bhagavad Gita, for example, when Sri Krishna describes such as realized soul, he says that he does not cling to wholesome thoughts nor hates if unwholesome thoughts come to him. The awareness of one's true pristine nature is like, my master used to say, it's like the oil that we put on our hands before we start cutting jackfruit. I don't know if you have jackfruit in England or in Europe, but in India we have these big, big jackfruits, and usually they have a very, when you cut them, milk comes out of it, adhesive, and it really sticks to your hand. So the only way to not allowing it to stick to our hands is usually what mothers in India do, that they take a lot of oil into their hands and even on the knife, and then they cut it with that. So this wisdom is like that, what sometimes in the mindfulness tradition is referred to as the Teflon mind. The Teflon is the same like you use the Teflon at home, you know, non-adhesive cooking utensils. That's Teflon mind. So allowing the mind to become like that. There is no other way out. Dhyana, this wisdom, this insight of one's true nature, is ultimately what frees us from all effects of our conditioning. I will conclude with a very nice, a very, very beautiful quotation from a Dzogchen text, a Mahasandhi Adi Yoga text, where the master is trying to explain that this pristine light cannot be enhanced by the practice of virtue, nor it can be diminished by non-virtue. The same like the Upanishads say about Atman, about pure consciousness, the true nature of one's being. Nakarmana vardhate no kaniyan. Actions can neither increase it nor diminish it. Thus, great perfection, Siddha, recognizes that ultimately both virtue and non-virtue are simply conceptual constructs that ultimately constitute obstacles to the highest spiritual realization. The translation of the quotation from the Tantra of the Great Natural Arising of Awareness is, virtue is not to be practiced. If practiced, there is no Buddhahood. Neither is sin to be renounced. If renounced, Buddhahood is not achieved. Virtue is not to be practiced, nor sin to be renounced. Awareness, free from both virtue and sin, is the ultimate Buddha body of reality. It really sort of sums up the entire essence of this whole procedure of yoga. Now, coming back to very simple terms, what is the point of all this discussion? The point is, in simple words, engage in wholesome deeds, words and thoughts by being mindful at all times. If possible, accumulate yogic samskaras by practicing yogic practices, yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, whatever tradition, bhakti yoga, karma yoga, jnana yoga, that doesn't matter, yajna, charity, whatever we do, by accumulating beneficial, wholesome samskaras, let's support ourselves, lift ourselves up. And then, with that state of awareness, let's pursue ultimately the light of wisdom. Going into solitude, eating less, mindfulness practices, mantra japa, all these cleanses by reducing unwholesome sanskaras. The cleaner the heart, the more we enjoy solitude. For someone with many unwholesome samskaras, solitude can be traumatic, even sometimes can become a nightmare. So let's even just start by a mere smile that you offer to someone. It creates a samskara of smiling in them, and at the same time also strengthens your own samskara of smiling. This is why in the Vimarshini commentary of the Shiva Sutras, the master says something very beautiful. Smera, smera, stimita, vikasita, which means smile, smile, become still, and bloom. Smile, smile, become still and bloom like a flower. I thank my extremely dear friend Vidya Bhaskarji for creating this occasion very spontaneously. I congratulate him for all the great work that he's doing so selflessly for spreading knowledge and the true dharma in these otherwise quite strange times. I thank Swami Vivekanandji from Omkarananda Ashram, Switzerland, for being the inspiration behind all of my online activities, for giving that push to me to get active online in this way. And I thank Himaji for bringing us together today. I thank each one of you for being present. You may ask any questions now in here by opening your mic or by typing in the chat, whatever you think is easier for you.
Hari Om.
Hari Om.
It's
Yes.
so nice to hear you. This is my first time and I'm so impressed and really, really love each and every words that you have spoken.
Thank you very much.
Naturally, thanks to Vidya Bhaskarji and the group and everybody who have been working behind this one.
Yes.
Our avidya, the question is our avidya. I think we are born with that one. See, and we can contemplate on Aham Brahmasmi, and yet sometimes, after having done that once on Aham Brahmasmi, Brahman Aham, we try to actually, I can get one zalak, only a tiny bit, and then afterwards it just vanishes.
Yes.
What would you say that so that we can progress and that curtain can open much more,
Yes.
and we can see.
Yes, we get, you used this word jhalak, momentary insight, so beautifully. We often in our lives, we get momentary insights, but then again the veil of ignorance as if seems to cover us. That is why even before following jnana, Bhagavan Shri Krishna comes back to karma yoga, to selfless action, so that those veiling samskaras gradually can be reduced. Then he comes to bhakti yoga, to the yoga of supreme love. All of these, they really, otherwise, yes, sometimes we get these momentary insights. Suddenly these momentary insights come, but they don't remain long because again, the impurities, the opposite samskaras, they overwhelm it. That is why, for the sake of purification, that's why the masters emphasize so much on chitta shuddhi, on purification of the mind content by karma yoga, by bhakti yoga. In fact, the whole purpose of Ashtanga yoga, of the 8 limbs of yoga, for example, why meditation? Manuji says beautifully, dhyanena anishwaran gunan, by the practice of dhyana, by the practice of meditation, non-divine qualities start to vanish. What does the word bharga in Gayatri mantra? Om Tatsavitur Varenyam Bhargaha, that bharga, that light that Gayatri mantra speaks of, which roasts away the impurities. What is that mantra? What is that light that they are meditating upon? So that those impurities. So yes, sometimes insights come, even without hearing Mahavakyas, insights come. Aham Brahmasmi, Tattvamasi, all of these Mahavakyas, people, for example, when somebody passes away, somebody dies, then people become quite, in those moments, knowledgeable. That's what we call Shmashana Vairagya in India, which means detachment that lasts only in Shmashana, in the cremation ground. The moment they come out of it, everything again is forgotten. That's because the other samskaras become so strong. So the only solution, again, is to accumulate positive samskaras, wholesome samskaras, to strengthen that wisdom so that it permeates all activities that we do in our life.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are a lot of questions here that have been sent. Okay. I would have to read the question. Quite very detailed and very, very potent, very deep questions. For example, will bad thoughts against anyone considered as papam under the laws of karmas? Yes, because they taint us. Bad thoughts, particularly if they come repeatedly, they get strengthened. And that's why papa simply means that which taints us. Bad thoughts, harmful thoughts, they taint us. That's why they are papa. Yes. Can I change my prarabdha? Can prarabdha be changed? That's a very tough question. Usually the idea amongst the masters in the Vedic traditions are that prarabdha is something that is very, very difficult to change. Prarabdha are the types of actions which have already started giving their results. What is possible, however, just to cut the answer short, is that Shankaracharya says beautifully in his Aparokshanubhuti that prarabdha might not, it might not be possible to change prarabdha, but it might be very possible to transcend it. For example, if we take the example of Ramakrishna Paramahansa, it was his prarabdha that his body, because prarabdha is only effective on the level of the body and mind, but someone who has gone beyond that, how can prarabdha then affect that person? So yes, if the question is about the body and mind, then it is very difficult to change prarabdha. But if it's on the level of beyond that, then Shankaracharya says that such masters, when they have transcended, they have also transcended prarabdha. That is why then, even if the body becomes sick, the masters don't actually suffer. Vijnana Bhikshu in his commentary on the Yoga Sutra says that it is ultimately a samprajnata samadhi, the deepest state of samadhi, the only one thing that can eradicate prarabdha altogether, his view. Is there an element of divine grace within prarabdha? Given God is above all karma, can there be divine grace outside prarabdha? Okay. Divine grace is always present. Ishvara Kripa is always present. Shastra Kripa, the grace of the teachings, is always present, equally shining over all beings. Samoham sarva bhuteshu name dveshyostina priyaha. The Lord says, I'm equal towards all beings. Grace of the divine is shining on every living being equally. Like Shankaracharya gives the example in Brahma Sutra of a cloud raining down equally on all crops. So divine grace is equally present on all. The grace of the masters is equally present because also the masters are equal, samabuddhi, totally equal towards all. The grace of the teachings are also present. So these three graces are ever present. The fact that I have a human body, a healthy human body, means that the grace of the masters, the grace of the divine is present. But is my own grace present or not? That's the big question. Atma Kripa, the fourth type of Kripa. Ishwar Kripa is present, Guru Kripa is present, Shastra Kripa is present. But whether Atma Kripa, my own grace, that is present or not, that's the biggest question. Okay. Yes, it is totally possible to change our samskaras. Samskaras can be changed. Samskaras can be suppressed. Samskaras can be overwritten. There are three things that Vedavyasa in his commentary on the Yoga Sutras says, that by performing good samskaras, bad samskaras can be suppressed. Bad samskaras can be totally eradicated, or you can sow good seeds among a field of bad samskaras as well. So even if as a result of those bad samskaras, some suffering comes, that suffering will also be punctured by happiness, joy, as a result of the small little seeds of good samskaras that you have sown in it. So there are three things that Vedavyasa mentions there. With someone's accent, yes, it is very difficult, but I think even if we become older, this neuroplasticity of our brain to a great extent remains the same to a great extent. We can always, of course, yes, the older we become, the more effort we have to make if we want to introduce changes. That is why there is so much importance on the masters lay so much importance on starting this journey, spiritual journey, as early as possible. Because the earlier we start, the easier it is, but it is never, ever too late. I remember Swami Ramatirtha, one of the great masters who took the first teachings of yoga into the West after Swami Vivekananda. He speaks about his journey of coming back from the US to India. He saw how a 96-year-old man on the ship was learning Chinese language. Can you believe? The most difficult language in the world at the age of 96. This was a great inspiration for Swami Ramatirtha. If at the age of 96, this person has such a strong stamina and such a strong resolution, then all of us, and then of course the way Krishna describes the idea of yoga bhrashta, that every step that we take into this direction, even in the last moments of our lives, then continues. Whatever we do, even towards the end of this life, then continues in the future lives. We start from there again. So everything that we do, no matter when we start, we can always improve. Fully changed or not, that depends how much effort we can put into it, our individual circumstances, but something can be done always. Are samskaras same as vasanas? Yes. Samskara, the word samskara and vasana are very often interchangeably used. Vasana is sometimes a little bit more specifically used for the samskaras caused by kleshas. For example, samskara caused by avidya would be referred to as vasana. In fact, you could say that when samskaras go very, very deep, they become very, very deeply rooted. that is when they become vasanas. That's slightly, so more intense, deeply rooted, deeply permeated samskaras are then usually referred to as vasanas. Both. Some samskaras are conducive to harm kleshas. Do we destroy them through sadhana, or do they become dormant through this? Yes. Initially, for example, why does Patanjali speak of Kriya Yoga in the beginning of the second chapter? Samadhi bhavanartha klesha tanu karanarthascha. To attenuate the samskaras of the fundamental causes of suffering. So initially, Patanjali speaks of attenuating them, making them weaker, drying out the water out of the wood, so to say. So first attenuation, and then roasting the seed so that it cannot produce the seed anymore. But for that, first of all, fire has to be produced. So for that, the wood has to be dry. So first you have to dry the wood, and then fire, the fire of knowledge, then can destroy it completely. So initially, yes, it is about attenuating it, making it dormant also, and eventually it's overcoming it. Okay. The three aspects that I spoke of was attachment, hatred, and yes, the third one was avidya, depending on the context, or maybe the third one was fear. The ones attachment, hatred, and fear. Avidya is the root cause of all these three.
Hi, Siddhartha.
Yes.
Thank you very much for your talk. I really enjoyed it.
Such a pleasure.
I understand, I think it was very interesting to understand forgetting true nature is the cause of, can be the cause of unhappiness.
Yes.
And what I'm interested in finding out, or maybe perhaps getting a tip, is so I can find myself getting attached to things I like or find joy in. And I think it's important. I think part of your teachings is, yes, let's appreciate positive, wholesome things, but you also want not to be attached. Is that correct?
Very important. Yes, that was the point, even in the context of practices such as loving kindness, which doesn't mean that we stop acting them out. It simply means not to even get attached to them. Yes, that's what one of the Upanishads beautifully. Continue to act them out, but also to get even Patanjali speaks of detachment from wisdom, because even wisdom is a state of mind. Ritambhara prajna is a state of intellect, even transcending beyond that, losing interest ultimately after it has been accumulated. Then Patanjali speaks of even being non-attached to that. So yes.
Okay, I think
Yes.
difficult, but probably difficult to practice, but I
Step by step.
yeah. Thank you.
Hello, namaskar, Siddharji. Can you hear me?
I think that was it. So will someone guide us how to?
Siddhartha, I think there's one more question. Let's have
Okay.
one more question and then we will
Yes.
finish.
Yes, please. Where is it? I'm not. Is there one more question? Okay, this one.
Siddhartha-ji,
Yes.
thank you very much for this.
Oh, Judith.
Amazing talk. I'm every time wondering how much every word you say teaches us, not just the topic or the sentence, but literally every word.
Thank you very much.
I had a question, which I think in this particular talk may be quite important. We always encounter the idea of forgetting or distancing ourselves from our true nature. But there are so many different definitions of our true nature in the literature, and some of them are quite different from the definitions in the scriptures. So I wanted to ask if it's possible to say a few words about forgetting our true nature, about the true nature.
Yeah. I think Vidya Bhaskarji, would you like to say something to this?
Oh dear,
You
oh
are-
dear. So maybe we can say that our true nature is simply everything as it is when we completely let go, when we completely relax from any sense of clinging to ego, clinging to anything that is fabricated by the mind. When we completely let go, then we will rest into the true nature, but the true nature itself cannot be defined. That is what all the scriptures agree and what all the masters agree. It is not something definable because that would make it a domain of the mind, but because it is beyond that, we can only rest into it and experience it rather than speak about it. Siddharthaji, would you agree?
Yes. Yes, yes, beautiful, beautiful. I was just thinking that when we sit down in meditation, usually we realize that in our daily lives, we identify with the stream of thoughts that come, all the samskaras that are coming, even this tiny little ego, ahankara, with which we identify so strongly, which is the result of a deep-rooted samskara. In fact, the samskara of ahankara, the samskara of ego, is referred to by Patanjali as asmita. And so as long as I identify with these resultant mental states from deep-rooted samskaras, the kind of nature that I think I am, the kind of person that I am, is a constructed nature, is a created nature. But then there is that higher space referred to as the pristine space of consciousness, in which Chidakasha, as the masters, as the Upanishadic masters refer to it, in which all these samskaras, they come up as conscious thoughts, that in which all these thoughts arise, that thoughtless space, that space of consciousness, of which there is no limitation, in which there is no limit. That is what is, in simple terms, Om Kham Brahma, the last mantra from the Yajurveda, when it defines that true nature. Prajnanam Brahma, when the Aitareya Upanishad defines it, pure consciousness, consciousness freed from all these samskaras and resultant states of mind, even when those states of mind are present, but that fundamental essence in which they arise, in which they are present, and into which ultimately they merge back. That is what is understood to be, in very simple terms. A lot can be said on that, but as just right now Vidya Bhaskarji beautifully explained, that I think is ultimately, in simple terms, the true nature of oneself. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you both very, very, very much. Thank you.
Such a pleasure. Thank you very
With
much.
this, we thank you, Siddhartha-ji, for this wonderful session. And we believe many, many more people wanted to come in, but we only had 100 limit in this Zoom. So I think next time we have a session with you, we will set the limit to 500 or 1,000. So this was amazing. And I think everyone agrees that we should have a session like this with Siddhartha-ji every once in a while on a special subject. And then we will get his expert advice. Thank you so much. And Chandrakant-ji, would you like to give the closing words?
Hari Om, Pranam.
Hari Om, Hari Om, Pranam,
Pranam.
Pranam, Pranam.
आपके
Pranams
बारे में
to Guruji.
आपके
परम
बारे में
पूज्य
बहुत
पुनीताचार्य जी
सुना था.
महाराज.
We have
जी.
heard quite a lot of you about you from Vidya Bhaskar ji. All the time he
Such a
was
pleasure.
talking about you. So I was very anxious to just see you. This is just like a meeting you, really.
Your presence is a great blessing, sir. Thank you.
We
very much.
all are so blessed that you came. There was a tears in my eyes when you started prayers, really. And another thing, Vidya Bhaskar ji, what I was thinking that in Hindi, if we do also for the benefit of the other people, it will be one of the best thing what we can do, and there will be more than 500 people in Hindi. So we can do
उसमें तो
both
जो
in
अपनापन
English.
लगेगा, जो आनंद आएगा.
So we can do both. बहुत अच्छा रहेगा. It was so nice of you, sir. And just to conclude, I will say that it was a wonderful session, and we would like you to come all once a while, once a month, at least once a month. यदि आप अनुयाज्ञा दे, if you are happy to do that.
गुरुजनों की
we
कृपा,
can arrange that.
आपका आशीर्वाद, आप बड़े हैं. जरूर, जैसा आप
आपका
आज्ञा
आशीर्वाद.
करेंगे, जो आदेश करेंगे, वो अवश्य होगा.
आदेश तो हमारे विद्या भास्कर जी का चाहिए.
जी, उनका तो है ही.
नहीं.
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद.
बहुत धन्यवाद. Thank you, everybody, and enjoy your weekend. Thank you, Siddhartha-ji. Thank you, Chandrakant.
Thank you very much.